Welcome to the first ever edition of OKOGA Live. I'm Chad Warmington. I'm the president of the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association. Really glad you're here. Really excited about this show. We're going to do it throughout the legislative session and probably sometimes throughout the year. And we want to bring in people and elected officials who are plugged in and engaged on the legislative activities or policy activities that are taking place throughout the state at different times through the year. So it's a way for us to keep you informed on relevant issues. And so we're really excited about it. As you know, session kicked off this week. There's a lot going on, a lot of activity, a lot of excitement, and a lot of things that are focused on some of the couple things we're going to talk about this afternoon in this show. We really wanted to make sure you were aware of a couple of things, particularly OKOGA members and others that are supporting some of our activities. Wanted to make you aware of a study that we released about a week or so ago from Mark Sneed with Region Track. And the economic impact study is really unique in the sense that we commissioned Dr. Sneed to go and look at the total tax burden of the oil and gas industry, not just gross production tax, which everyone gets focused on, or even just ad valorem tax, but also to add in the burden of income tax and sales tax, because the total tax burden that the industry pays is really important for legislators and policymakers to keep in mind. And what we asked Dr. Sneed to do is take a look at that and just give us an overview compared to 15 or so other energy-producing states, and the results were really, really interesting. If you look at what he came up with, Oklahoma is not a low-tax state. When you look at just gross production tax, it may appear so, but again, that's not a fair comparison to other oil and gas producing states. Currently, we're the 5th highest tax state. If the legislature passes the step-up plan, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, we'd be the 3rd highest tax state. And if a ballot initiative that passed in 2018, that's potentially going to be on the ballot, we'd be the 2nd highest tax state. And you really got to remember, why does that matter? Well, you know, capital flees a hostile environment, and we need to keep a low-cost, competitive tax environment. We have to have a fair and easy-to-use regulatory environment. And those are the things that contribute to Oklahoma being a really great place to do business in the oil and gas industry. So the release of the Sneed study was important to give a document to policymakers that really did a good apples-to-apples comparison of the tax burden that the industry faces. So want to make sure you point that out. It's available on our website. I want to make sure it's available to anyone who has an interest in it. Go take a look at that. Also wanted to talk about, as we did just a little bit ago, the Step Up Oklahoma plan. And the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association is in support of the Step Up Oklahoma plan. And why are we in support of it? Well, we're in support of it for a couple of reasons. One being teacher pay raise. It's unacceptable for Oklahoma to have 4-day school weeks, teachers fleeing the state, leaving to Texas and other places while chasing good pay, which we all want. And that's the primary reason that we're interested in it. And the second thing is, and probably it's 1B if you were prioritizing them, is the recurring revenue and a broadening of the revenue base of Oklahoma. That's a really important part of the step-up plan, and it's the critical part that our board of directors feels that we've got to broaden out the base, we've got to get ourselves off this merry-go-round and get these deficits handled so that we can really start focusing on how to move Oklahoma forward. In the plan, it calls for a gross production tax increase on us, and we're supportive of that. We wanted to make sure that we warn lawmakers, hey, look, we're for it, but it definitely has negative economic consequences. That's what the Sneed study will point out. Again, if we moved up to the 4% rate, we'll be the 3rd highest taxed state in terms of total taxation. But at the end of the day, the benefits of the step-up plan were important. It felt like this was our opportunity to get the state its head above water and hopefully get some positive momentum coming out of this legislative session as we enter into the summer. It's going to be a good time for oil and gas activity. Should be a good time for the state of Oklahoma. Why does all of that matter? Well, it matters because a fair tax environment benefits all Oklahomans. And what we try to do is keep in mind that it's not just tall buildings downtown or big campuses in the northwest part of Oklahoma City or buildings in Tulsa. It's oil and gas impacts economic activity all over the state. And it's not, again, just people that are involved in the oil and gas industry. It impacts everyone from restaurant owners to dry cleaners. We put together a video that we use to remind ourselves that when we talk about the oil and gas industry and its impact, it isn't just on oil and gas activity.
Let me tell you how important the oil and gas industry is to myself, my family, and nearly everyone else in my community. Without the oil and gas industry, many businesses would suffer, including my own, not to mention schools, hospitals, and local charities. And yet, our state government wants to tax oil and gas and force them to drill elsewhere. Short-sighted? You bet. Think about how much Oklahoma oil and gas benefits all of us. It does so much for so many.
Hope that video was helpful in articulating kind of that view. Super excited to welcome our first guest, Corporation Commissioner, Chairwoman Dana Murphy of the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. Thank you for being here.
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, we're longtime friends and neighbors, and so it felt appropriate to have you on the show. And really excited and want to talk to you about a couple of things. One is a kind of top of mind issue that's been on the mind of a lot of Oklahomans, which is seismicity in the state. And I wanted to get some insight from you on. The Commission did a phenomenal job of getting their arms around this problem, identifying it, and being really relentless in pursuing regulations that have dramatically positively impacted. So I want to just kind of get some thoughts from you on that and hear what the Commission's working on.
Well, you know, the great benefit of all of it is we started out with nothing, and you know that. We didn't really have a seismicity department. We didn't have any staff. And so now we've really come a long way from the time we started taking actions in 2015 now up to 2017. So the good news is, if you want to just fast forward and look at the results, is in 2015 we were having about 5.6 magnitude number of earthquakes of 2.7 magnitude or greater. In 2016 we were having 3.6. In 2017 it's gone down less than 2. And right now for January and just the first few weeks of February, it's right around 1. So really good news.
It's great news, and it's you know, one of the nice things about having the Geological Survey involved with this whole process is we've got this unbiased arbiter of, you know, how we're doing in terms of seismicity decline. And Dr. Jerry Boak, the head of the Geological Survey, will say, you know, seismicity overall, particularly in that part of the state, is down about 80% from the highs. And that's a really good thing, and I think we should applaud the Commission for doing and taking the necessary steps to get on top of it. And it was a very good collaborative approach with industry. But you're not done, and you've been very clear about your desire to make sure that we get back to that normal background level. And so it's been really a constant evolving of the policies. And so, I mean, kind of comment on that about you're staying on top of it, and you've been consistent in updating those regulations, and I think the results speak for themselves. But kind of give us a little bit about the staff that you put together and kind of their work.
Right. Well, I think you used a key word that I think is very important. This collaborative effort, it's between the researchers and the regulators and the industry. And what a lot of people didn't really understand, if we wouldn't have had that dynamic working, this would have been far more difficult. And as we've said from the outset, it's really important that we continue to look at things that we can do as we have more data available to us, as we continue to do the research and work with others on this, is to take additional steps. So we've always indicated from the beginning it's an ongoing process. The thing that we're going to be coming out with soon is the issue of where we've had some earthquakes associated with hydraulic fracturing, typically low sustained, low magnitude, but it's really important for us to stay on top of that, and we'll be coming out with some changes to our protocol here shortly.
Yeah, I think it's another great example of the Commission really took a proactive approach. Not many people know that you've had guidelines in place for this anomalous seismic activity around a completion operation for over a year.
Right.
And so you've been on top of it. I think there's some people that are just kind of waking up to the fact that maybe that this is something that's happening in Oklahoma. But I think the Commission did a really good job of understanding that it was a potential, saw some activity, and then put in place some really good guidelines. And so it's good to hear that you'll be coming soon with an update to those, very similar to the process you've used, that as the data and the science evolve, so do the regulations. And they typically have gotten tougher, which is good.
Right.
And you want more compliance from the industry, which is exactly what a regulator should do. But I think it's a really good example of that really collaborative approach that you have taken, that the Governor's Coordinating Council has helped become a part of as well, of getting industry, academics, NGOs in the room and saying, hey, what do we need to do to get our arms around that? And I wanted to kind of go back to, real quickly, I think it's a really interesting story to find out that in terms of the disposal well data, the Commission used to have to get that in by emails and faxes and spreadsheet, compile it, put it all together, and take all that time. And one of the real success stories was asking for getting funding and completely overhauling the IT system. So I really wanted you to talk about that real quick too, about the modernization of the Commission. I know that's something we'll talk about in a minute, but that was an example of why it was really needed.
Well, I think it's really important. I think the point that you made, I mean, we had people bring data in and not just fax it in, mail it in. And so to get to a place where we could have the software that was necessary to have data that we could just upload immediately so we didn't have to spend so much manpower on that. That has been provided just a great benefit to us and helped us, be able to be more time responsive in taking actions that we've needed to take. So that has really been a collaborative effort as well. So if we wouldn't have had the sources of funding that we've needed from all these diverse sources, that would have been more challenging. So a shout out to the Groundwater Protection Council, the Office of the Secretary of Energy and Environment, the governor. The problem we're going to have now on a go-forward basis, there is no more of this one-time available funding, and we've asked the legislature this year to look at some kind of sustaining or recurring revenue, about $700,000 or so, to actually run our department.
I know that that issue hasn't fallen on deaf ears. There's a number of pieces of legislation out there that are related to the seismicity issue, and I hope we can keep the legislature focused on. At the end of the day, you have to have the regulator have the money to make sure that they have the tools and the necessary personnel to properly regulate the industry. And it's a really important thing for legislators to keep in mind. They regulate the most important industry in the state, and we want them to be able to do that timely and efficiently and with the data and the science that they need in order to make good regulations. I want to real quick go back to this new upgrade for this new update to the seismic guidelines. And again, I think being involved with it from the Governor's Coordinating Council was a really great collaborative approach as well. Your seismicity team of Tim Baker and the team of the Oil and Gas Conservation Division, Charles Lord, have done a phenomenal job of really being kind of cutting edge in learning how to regulate seismic activity. And so we'll be anxious to see the updates, but I wanted just to give a shout out, so to speak, to your team there. They've been very good about taking real world application and data from an industry, comparing it with seismic data from the Geological Survey, and really coming up with guidelines that make sense, that are tough but fair, that require operators to do things that are in the best interest of Oklahoma. We don't want any, as little or none, of felt seismic activity at the surface, and I think that's what we're going to get with your new guidelines.
And I really appreciate you saying that, because you just look at, we had to take people that had never dealt with this before, put them into this scenario, and then ask them to actually respond timely. So people didn't really get to see how we really built this up from nothing. And it's not just the issue of how far our people have come with the research and technology and how we deal with things, but how they go out and speak to the public. Our oil and gas division, especially the seismic area, have gone out regularly for town hall meetings across the state of Oklahoma. So in addition to just doing the technical scientific aspects and the things that need to be put out, they've really been involved with the PR aspect of doing that. And I think that's really, it's caused our employees to grow, and I think it's helped people see more about what we actually really do.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to sit in on some of Tim's presentation, and he takes tough questions and he gives very good, straightforward answers. And I think that gives Oklahomans the confidence that the Commission's doing the right things. And I think that's through a lot of your leadership as well, telling them to get out, go to those meetings, and tell them what you're doing. And I think it's been a super success story. Don't want to get out of here without talking about Commission budget overall,
all right,
though. This is a legislative time, and it's a legislative-focused show. So I know that you recently presented to the, I think the Oklahoma House Representatives on your budget. But let's talk real quick about your budget and how it's evolved, and how this budget crisis has really sapped some of your funds, and hopefully we can refill those and get the Commission the financial footing it needs to continue to grow and improve its services in the future.
Right. Well, what most people don't realize is our budget's about $58 million, but of that, about $20 million is actually needed for the oil and gas division. So the challenge is we've been cut in the last 4 years about $14 million, and about $8 million of that has gone to the oil and gas division. So we continue to lose ground. We have positions that are unfilled. I think Tim mentioned in our rulemaking just this week that we were 14 positions short. And you're talking technical people, geologists and other scientific professionals. And we're in a hole now that we need to start making progress to come out of. And there's many different ideas that can be used to look at funding. We're actually discussing the issue now of raising fees, but I think all the commissioners, I can speak for myself, but I think we're all supportive of this issue. Is there some other way to fund it? Is there some way that part of the gross production tax can be allocated toward funding the commission? Is there a greater portion of the petroleum excise tax? Are there some other mechanisms? I think it's important to put all the ideas on the table, but the reality is the problem is here. You can't kick the can down the road, and it's time to do something.
No doubt. I think if people realized how thin-staffed you were and your expertise The expertise that you have in the Oil and Gas Conservation Division alone, I made a joke that we ought to have Tim Baker drive back and forth to work in an armored truck because we don't want anything to happen to him. That's how important he is to the state. But we need to build that bench, and that's going to require funds, and it's going to require commitment from the legislature to understand the importance. And so we'll be continuing to advocate for that. I know that you will. You've been a relentless advocate of it. The Corporation Commission regulates, I think the statistic is like 85 or 90% of all the business activities in the state, and those are significant revenue generators, and they really help the state prosper. We got to make sure we fund it properly, and I know that's something that you'll stay on top
Right. I
of.
mean, I think most people don't realize, we're really the most economically powerful agency in the state. And I always use a simple acronym. I've used it ever since I started at the commission, but TOPP, Transportation, Oil and Gas, Petroleum Storage Tanks, and Public Utilities. So really, anytime goods are moved by rail or truck or pipeline, or you use your phone, or you have electricity to your home, we're really the pocketbook agency of all Oklahomans.
No doubt. I think if more Oklahomans understood how impactful your agency is to their everyday life, they pay a lot of attention. And so wanted to also make sure we know that there's three commissioners. You've got some good colleagues you're working with, Commissioner Hyatt, Commissioner Anthony as well, and you guys have done a fantastic job. I think your model of regulation, particularly as it deals with seismicity and your engagement with the industry, is really as a representative that many other regulatory bodies ought to look at. And so we're proud of our relationship with the Corporation Commission. We're very thankful for you and your service, and really wanted to thank you for coming in today and talking just a little bit about the commission and about the real success stories that we've had and the challenges that lie ahead. And I know you're on top of it and going to take care of them.
Right, and I think it's important to point out, we've heard this issue about auditing everything, and we just recently came out and I did an editorial piece that talked about all the audits and performance reviews we've had at the commission. So people can be assured we've spent about $650,000 in the last few years with embedded auditors, so that when we are provided money, we're making the best and highest use of it. We've actually done some restructuring, so we're trying to do our part in helping in this budget situation as well.
No doubt. We want to make sure we're being good stewards of the taxpayers' money, and I think you all do a great job of that. Is there anything else you wanted to wrap up with before we close up?
Well, I just want to say it's just been terrific to be a part of this collaborative effort. I think the paradigm of regulation, I think, has really changed. And if we wouldn't have had this type of effort with industry, the researchers, and not just researchers in the state, but researchers outside the state, and then the dynamic of, interfacing with the public, I think that's made a really big difference.
Huge difference. It's been fun to be a part of it, I'll tell you that. And I think the results speak for themselves. I think Oklahomans can see the benefit of that collaboration and smart regulation. Right. Well, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. We'll see you in the neighborhood because you just live down the street.
That'll be
we
great.
Won't go far.
Yeah.
And I wanted to thank you all for tuning in and watching. This is our first show. We're going to get better. We're going to have good guests. We'd love suggestions on people you'd like to see as well, and maybe even some of the questions you'd like to see asked of them. But thank you for showing up for OKOGA Live, the first ever, and we'll catch you next week.